Good afternoon. I think, sounds like microphone's working. Welcome everyone this afternoon to a seminar on turning challenges into opportunities. This is organised by GB Potatoes. If you would be so kind as to, if you're not on our mailing list already, to see Graham at the back when we're done. He has a form you could fill in to join our very informative mailing list, which hopefully will be of use to you all. We've got three speakers this afternoon talking about this. We've got Tim Rooke, who's going to talk about challenging times to be a potato grower. When are they not? We've got Mark Taylor, who is talking about challenging times in the supply chain, and again, when are they not? And then we've got Alex Godfrey, who really is the centrepiece, talking about turning those challenges into opportunities. Actually, the other thing Graham asked me to mention just before we get done is that if you want to claim a basis point for having been here this afternoon, you can do that at the basis desk, which is just outside the door as you leave. So I will just introduce our three speakers now. I'll do all the introductions at the start. We'll try and run through each of their presentations, and if we can hold questions to the end, then we can ask them as a panel at the end, and they'll decide who's best to answer what, I would think. Without any further ado, I'd introduce Tim Rooke, who is the NFU Potato Policy Group Chair. He's a third generation farmer growing about 600 acres of processing and crisping potatoes in North Yorkshire, farms in partnership with his brother, has a mixture of tenanted and owned farms, also growing other combinable crops including wheat, oats and oilseed rape. After we've heard from Tim, we will hear from Mark Taylor, who is a director of Agrimark Consulting based in South Links. Previous to this, Mark was a director at FEMMARK, supplying fresh potatoes and root veg for 28 years into retail, primarily into Asda, and was involved in the transition of FEMMARK into the IPL Asda business. Currently, Mark's also chair of Nene Potatoes, chair of the Fresh Potato Supply Association, and a non-executive director at Caledonia Potatoes, as well as being board member with British Growers. The list goes on, doesn't it? It really does. And also current chair of GB Potatoes. And finally, we'll hear from Alex Godfrey. Alex is a director in his family farming business based in North Lincolnshire, business growing potatoes on the Wolds, the Lincolnshire Wolds, the Isle of Axholme and Holbeach Marsh, primarily aimed at the packing market. Alex is also an NFU Potato Forum member, and he chaired that forum from 2015 to 2022. And during that time, he was also on the NFU Horticulture and Potatoes Board. So without further ado, I will ask Tim to present. Thank you, Tim.
Okay. So, good afternoon. Spoilt my first paragraph, which is basically I'm Tim Rooke and chair of the NFU Potato Policy Group. So can we have the first slide?
You got that one?
Yeah. So what keeps you awake at night is probably how we should be looking at this. It's a challenging time growing potatoes, and probably the things that keep you awake at night are probably the things that are the most challenging. So is it your snoring? Is it your partner's snoring? But I've drawn a list up of challenges, which I think is probably the main reason for you being awake at night. And in no particular order, I've got challenge number one. And this is what we hear all the time, risk against return. Costs are going up. Nitrogen went up 300% and then came back down probably 200%. Electricity, some contracts have gone up by 300%, and I would think eventually we'll all be up, when we've all renewed, we'll all be up at least 200%. Fuel is up 50%, sprays are up 25%. The cost of labour is up, that's if you can get some. Now the talk I'm hearing all the time, and my accountant asked me what these big bills were, and that's the cost of machinery. Harvesters are now costing the price of a small Scottish island. And parts for running the harvester is costing the price of a small house in Hull. So, yes, contract prices have gone up, but the problem as I see it is risk against return. Have they gone up enough? Just ask anybody who hasn't finished harvesting yet. The weather patterns are unpredictable. We might call it climate change. I call it climate change. Some people call it, well, this happens every year. But will it be the next wettest planting again? Will it be the driest planting again? Will it ever stop raining in October next year? Will it ever rain in October next year? Will it be 40 degrees next summer? We've absolutely no idea. Challenges are out there, and I believe climate change is the main reason for the challenge. The risks are ridiculous against the rewards. I've often thought about being on Dragon's Den and trying to get investment. So my pitch is, I need 500,000 to grow 200 acres of potatoes. I'm asked what the return will be. Well, first of all, we like to cover our costs. If we do really well, we might make 10 or 15%. So then Peter asked me, well, what are the risk factors? Well, it more or less depends on the weather, and then that sort of depends on the quality of the potato, I tell him. I tell him if we don't get the right weather, we won't get the right quality, and we won't get the yield that we expected. He then asked me, if the quality isn't there, what do we do with them? I then spend 10 minutes explaining to the den what stock feed is. I don't think I would get through the door. Second slide, please. The second challenge is availability of land. This is huge. Large areas are being taken out of production for rewilding, mid-tier, stewardship, peas, digesters, solar panels. Potatoes are not loved by landlords. We get blamed for soil erosion, we get blamed for muddy roads, and even if the alternative crop of maize or sugar beet are being harvested at the same time, we always get the blame for the roads. Even if there isn't any potatoes in the area, it's always the potato men that are making the mess. Landlords are chasing wheat crops, farmers are chasing the more straw for outdoor pigs and for bed and breakfast pigs. It's a huge challenge getting good land. It's even a bigger challenge getting good land with irrigation. Two things that make me smile about renting land. If you get a good landlord, they always say after 1 year, well, it's a better field next year. And after the next year, they say, well, it's an even better field the year after. And the year after that, it's probably the best field on the farm. And I often wonder what I was in on year one. The other one is you pay a large rent, and after you've taken the planter out of the field, they often ask, and when do you think you'll be lifting them? The other challenge we have here is, slide 3, please, is loss of actives. I've been doing this far too long, and I can remember too many actives that we've now lost. I can remember aldrin for wireworm, that got replaced by gamma col, that got replaced by nothing, or maybe mocap. I can remember temic, that got replaced by vidate, that probably got replaced by mocap as well. We've lost all those. But losing diquat was one of the main crop and seed growers in my area was huge. The alternative, Spotlight and Gozai, need a ridiculous number of things to be working in our favour for them to even work. Try again a warm sunny day in North Yorkshire, first week in October when you're trying to finish a field of royals. I think it works better at temperatures over 25 degrees. It hasn't any chance of working to any effect. The only alternative is probably flailing, which is not ideal in my area in October. The loss of actives and no viable alternative is worrying and challenging to the industry. And this conveniently leads me into nemathodine. Next slide, please. I'm on the PCN forum. Our brief is to live without nematicides. How will this work? I believe 35 to 45% of the main crop in this area in the country is treated with nemathodine. It costs round about £550 a hectare. If there was an alternative way of producing an economic crop, I'm sure we'd all be drilling white radish, other fumigants and catch crops. at a fraction of £550 a hectare. And that's obviously reliant on having a tolerant landlord, because we're now told that it's probably better established the year before, so we'd need the land for 2 years. That would be an interesting conversation. We have to get real with the pressure of not having nemathodorine, but we've also got to get real with the alternatives out there. The best way of dealing with PCN in the future, I believe, will be through resistant and tolerant varieties. But since Brexit, we cannot import the seed. Continental breeders are reluctant to trial new varieties, which we desperately need access to due to increased paperwork and post-Brexit. This is a huge problem. Processors and packers are nervous to commit to new varieties because of consumer resistance. I was once told of a maltster, if he could find enough Maris Otter, we'd still be using Maris Otter everywhere to produce beer. They are very reluctant to change. And how many PCN tolerant and resistant varieties will we need? We need one for salads, we need one for early packing, we need one for main crop packing, we need one for early crisping, we need one for late crisping, we need one that would store okay. And of course, after we've done all that, we'd have to make sure that it had correct acrylamides. So there's many more challenges out there right through the industry, and a whole load of other challenges that we have is a loss of CIPC. We need to conform to the new residue testing in stores. We have a lack of data since we lost the AHDB, and that's where BP potatoes have come to the front. I don't know how many of you are aware that if we don't get enough samples in this next time, we'll be losing, most stores will be condemned. And since the loss of the HDB, since we've lost the HDB, it certainly doesn't keep me awake at night, but we've got to be real that the challenge is out there. Without them, we don't actually have any data what the area is. Red tractor is another nightmare. Let's hope that the Green Farm commitment is now well and truly dumped. I haven't even mentioned the challenges of the Environment Agency with irrigation licenses and a very unsympathetic agency as far as irrigation goes. So yes, there is a lot of challenges out there. Next slide, please. So why do we do it? Is it because we don't know any better? Or is it because we don't know anything else? I doubt it. I could just grow combinable crops. I do it because it's in my DNA. I was said I was a third generation potato grower. I'm probably a fourth or fifth generation potato grower. That's all I've ever known that our family do. But look at the graph here. You'll see 30 years ago, there was 30,000 growers. Now there's less than 1,500. And we believe that 500 of them are growing more than 50% of the crop. So the DNA pool is getting smaller. The biggest challenge to all challenges is keeping the GB potato industry alive and profitable. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good to see everybody. One role that I haven't mentioned, so I chair the Stakeholder Group, so that pulls off a number of these things. So that's the trade associations with the NFU and the NFUS. So that gives us a forum then that we meet every couple of weeks to talk about things in the industry. So I thought I'd use that as one of my headings. So I'm going to repeat, and I make no apology, some of the things that Tim's touched on, because it affects the whole supply chain. So those are impacts on the farm. They also ripple all the way through the industry. So late spring, delayed planting, we know, slow skin set and delay to the start of harvest. But we made some good early progress. We are still lifting today in some atrocious conditions. We shouldn't be out there and we're making an awful lot of damage. But it illustrates the risks. If it wasn't for our high capacity modern machinery, we really would not have made progress in the last month. So it's quite reassuring in one way that we can tackle some of these conditions, but the fact we're doing it is wrong. Tim mentioned data. We need to regain our baseline from the point of view of monitoring where we are. At the moment, there is an immense amount of speculation. We've added to it in the last 2 days here and talked about the area, the yield, what's ahead for next year, availability of seed. Much of it is an unknown. So as Tim said, it is one of the things that we are going to be potentially looking at as GB potatoes, because we should be making informed decisions around data, because speculation is not a tool. So to the extremes of weather, our weather is changing. You don't need me to tell you that. We are dealing with too little and too much rain, warmer temperatures, and that increases the risks of potato production and then the risk of pests and diseases. So with, again, fewer pesticides, that gets a bigger challenge. And I think particularly our autumn weather is less predictable. And I think as we move our harvest later, which we have done with some of our variety choices, I think that makes it harder. One of the things we're talking about now, so I think we are less than 5% in the UK still to lift. It might be 2 or 3%, but for the growers affected, that's really a big challenge. There could still be 15% of the crop out in Belgium and Holland, and Southern Ireland may still have 40% of its crop in the ground. So they are staggering figures from the point of view of the risks taken by the industry. You don't want to go there. So, stay. I'm just going to talk about the national crop. So the last figures we had were 2020, so it's 117,000 hectares. So that's the last accurate figure we had. We all know we've continued to see industry contraction. It's varied across the sectors, but that is still at play. That's still at play today. We cleared the decks this year, so unlike the 2 previous seasons where we carried over stock, July saw us use every potato. So we started this year's season with no stock carryover. We know that fresh production is moving into processing and or for some fresh growers out altogether. So I'm quite happy to be challenged on this, and it's a guesstimate and I'll stand by it. 102,000 hectares, call it 100,000. If we meet our normal national yield, we could have 4.5 million tonnes. We could have less than that this year. But again, I'm adding to that speculation. So I think getting back to some figures is where we need to be. Some of this has been mirrored in the EU as regards changes from the point of view of moving to processing. And I think it's fair to say, French fry production is on a high worldwide, and that is driving an awful lot of demand. Our marketplace has shrunk. Fresh, pre the pandemic, at retail level, was worth £1 billion. It's barely worth 800 million now, and we're selling about the same tonnage. Very sobering. So, ongoing activity. What are we doing here? So, it's a weekly conversation, which is drawing no favour at the moment. We need to regain our seed trading, mutual seed trading with Europe. That's in both directions. Tim mentioned it. So the CIP monitoring group, it is essential. It doesn't sound very sexy. We are obliged to provide CRD with data so we keep our MRL. We will be asking for support in this, and we will be coming out and asking industry to support us in sampling and residue testing. We will provide that data. The risk of not is too great. Communication in DEFRA and CRD. Again, it's a regular occurrence for us as industry bodies. They've had a big churn of people, so we spend an awful lot of time re-educating people as regards what our industry does, how we go about it, timeframes, and the likes, and that is an ongoing challenge, but one we're up for. Retaining our future access to water. So, hey, something else I chair, sorry. The Water for Food group, it is essential that we retain our access to water. We could be pushed down the list. We could have industry. We could have the local water authorities, so water for public good in preference to agriculture. We need to fight our corner to make sure that we can think about what we need. Tim touched on it. Pest and disease pressures increasing. The profile's changing. I think how we have to overcome some of these, we might need to be a little bit more creative and maybe engaging a little bit more in some integrated approaches is one way forward. So PCN, wireworm, I think two in particular that sort of are giving us increasingly hard times year on year. There are many more. I'm not going to talk about them this morning. I passionately believe about this as regards responding with a single voice. If we are to get our messages across, particularly into DEFRA and the EA, it cannot be or it needs to be a focused message. It needs to be precise, and we need to be very clear about what we're asking for. So governments, we've got another minister. So that's our 9th in 10 years as an Ag Minister. What a churn. There is some need now. We need for consistency on the Ag policy. This was an article in the FPJ earlier in the week. Rishi Sunak addresses global food crisis at London summit. I'd like him to address the food crisis in the UK. We don't have a food policy or strategy in the UK, and it's pathetic. It really is. We need government to get or seriously act on their words, because at the moment they're not. So as an industry, we need a seat at that table to represent ourselves. And we need to represent that on the focus, I think, as our sector, as potatoes. We are a significant sector. The value's there. I don't want to just lump in with agriculture generally. We might be able to do it at some appropriate times, but we need to represent our sector. Stress the importance of the value. I think one thing here is funding. There is money out there, and we need to think about this as an industry as regards post the HDB, suitable research, and supporting our industry. We've got to feed that pipe. At the moment, if we don't, we'll pay the consequences of that in 2 or 3 years' time. Right. Cost of production. They vary between farms, and that's not surprising. So we've been asked at a number of occasions, can we produce an average? That is just not achievable. If I came to 10 of you as growers in the audience today, you give me 10 sets of figures. I think one important factor we need to think about here is inflation impacts the whole way. Across the supply chain. So it's not just isolated areas. Some costs have reduced, but many have not. We use Anglia farmers a lot for buying our inputs and our cost calculations. In the last 12 months, and I think we should be open about this, those costs have come down 6%. But if we take that as a baseline from 2021, they've still gone up 34%. And that's what we need to reflect today. One of the other things we need to think about, and this has come really in sharp focus in the last 6 months, is the cost of finance and money. If you grow 100 hectares of potatoes, you're roughly investing £1 million. That money could be out to 8 to 10 months, longer in some cases. If you're borrowing money, you could be borrowing that at 8%. That's £15 a tonne on the average ware crop, which is a significant difference from where we were about a year ago. We operate a long planning cycle. So I think where we are here, we need to think about how this relates within our contract price increases. And the increases have helped. We're still playing a little bit of catch up, but they have helped. For everything we've talked about so far, the risks have increased. And I think everyone in the room would recognise that. And then ultimately, returns back to the farm need to reflect costs, risks. So it's the 3 R's for me: risk, rewards, and reinvestment. And they all come in the conversation together. Right. Take them in turn. You can probably tell the logo in the top corner. Red tractor, or is it red tape? We need appropriate compliance. It needs to be fit for purpose, and it must add value. Personal view, I'm going to take off all my industry hats now. I think we've got a bit of mission creep on that as regards their role and remit, and we need to get that a little bit more back under control. But we do need compliance. Inflation is eroding our return overall, and I've just touched on that. These last two, these reflect for me imports. The new annual import records are now being set year on year. So this primarily is frozen French fries. So in the 12 months of September 23, 828,000 tonnes of French fries was imported into the UK. That's the equivalent of 1.3 million tonnes of raw material. We should be growing and processing more of that product in the UK. That's an opportunity for us going forward. Risk and return. This is where I'm going to come back to my reinvestment. I ask the question to the floor now as much as myself. Have we lost our appetite to reinvest in the industry? Have we lost the confidence to reinvest? Is the lack of sustainable returns and the risk too great? Or is there an opportunity for us to take a longer term view on this? And I'd like to think we take the longer term view. So, looking to the future, and I'm going to wrap up now. We need to regain our mojo as an industry. And I've heard some more confident conversations in the last 2 days, and I think I'd like to build on that. We have great growers, great soils, world-leading expertise in growing the crop, excellent packing and processing facilities, and in the main, the climate, though we've been let down a little bit this year. So we should, in the UK, be able to make potatoes pay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So Mark and Tim have laid out the challenges. So it falls to me to talk about how we turn those into opportunities. And I would stress that it's about opportunities, it's not answers. I don't have the answers necessarily. If I did, I'm not sure I'd be standing here saying exactly what I thought they were. It's how we together and as GB Potatoes and what GB Potatoes is doing to try to turn those challenges into opportunities. So just before I get going on that, just to recap on GB Potatoes, our objective is very simple, and it's picking up where Tim left off. Our objective is to ensure a viable future for potato production in Great Britain. Sorry, I'm a slide ahead of myself. So we've been talking over the last year to variations of this slide. This is our 5-point plan for what we're going to do. To talk about it in a slightly different way, we're here to be a platform for the supply chain to collaborate, to address the challenges that are confronting our industry. So that's the enable and the communicate part. And to do that, we have to understand what's happening in the sector and how to access the research that's already out there. That's the know part. We're also there to be a single point of contact for the potato sector, for government, for media, for stakeholders. So that's speaking. We can speak with one voice. And we're here to deal with crisis and reputational management, so defend the reputation of the industry. That's the defend point. So, what have we been up to? We have a working partnership with CUPGRA, where we have a shared agenda on various items of research and development. We have a memorandum of understanding in place now with CUPGRA, because it's really important that we know what CUPGRA is doing and vice versa. So we've committed to work together so that we can leverage the value and impact of any activities undertaken by both parties in potato research and knowledge exchange, and therefore we can increase the impact of those with that collaboration. I should stress, though, that's not an exclusive arrangement. We can still work and will still work with other research organisations and commissioners within the industry. We've already talked a bit about PCN. It is one of the biggest challenges facing us as an industry. So GB Potatoes, together with CUPGRA, and with some support from PCN Action Scotland as well, has set up the PCN Forum, which Tim and Mark have both alluded to already. The goal there is to minimise the impact of PCN on the Great British potato crop. Another topic that's already been outlined as a challenge, plant protection products. We have set up the Plant Protection Products Forum, another forum that Mark is chairing. That's already met and plans to meet again soon. It focuses on supporting the evidence base to maintain our current range of plant protection products. Plant protection products is an incredibly sensitive area, and you've really got to get the communication and the representation right. It's a very sensitive subject. We need an organisation that's on the ball and that can take advantage of opportunities as they arise. A lot of the opportunities we're talking about are an opportunity to retain existing chemistry for longer, and that may require us to do other activities. It could include stewardship, an approach that was quite successful in CIPC and in nematicides, in at least extending the lives of some of the actives that we've had in the past. Water. Mark's already talked about the Water for Food group. This is an existing group, but Mark represents GB Potatoes on it, and you chair the group as well for potatoes. It's hard to have this conversation when we've just experienced as wet a period as we have, but we all know that that's one side of the equation, isn't it? We've all been through plenty of dry times as well. Abstraction is under fire. All abstraction licences will be reviewed by 2030. We need a template of abstractor group operations. We need the data to provide a national picture of our water needs, because as Mark said, otherwise that water is going to be taken away from us as farmers and growers. It'll go into public water supply where the demand is absolutely immense. GB Potatoes is very active within that group, helping to develop the remit and provide good governance. The aim of that group is to be a single point of contact for technical matters relating to water resource management and drought planning. Sorry, I should continue on that. Yeah, the key focuses for that group are to promote the need for water in agriculture through the National Framework for Water Resources, a strategy for abstraction licences. And it's really essential that anybody abstracting water engages in their local water abstractor groups, so we can have better communication with DEFRA, the EA and others, anybody linked with planning issues and abstraction. I think there's also an opportunity in there to make the sustainability argument to make sure we keep our fair share of water, both in terms of where potatoes are grown and the types of varieties that we're growing. Storage. We have re-established, if you like, a strategic potato store programme in partnership with SDF Agriculture and Potato Storage Insight. We've got hosts in year one, Winters Lane Storage at Long Sutton and Stephen Pugh's Gedney stores. These will be used for ongoing testing, evaluation and dissemination of data, really with a drive to finding practical solutions on storage topics directly related to the potato industry. We're hoping to add a seed store in year two. There will be a dissemination meeting on the 5th of December in Wisbech, and we're hoping to have a site meeting in May next year as well. But there's a whole host of trials that have been carried out in year one, but in particular, they've been focusing on things that we can actually do something about quickly: sprout control, energy usage, which is highly topical, and storage cost management. Virus. The National Virus Forum was established back in January 2020 off the back of certain issues people experienced in the 2019 season. That predates GB Potatoes. But we have adopted the Virus Forum to take it forward. Mark's also chairing that. It's essential that we keep talking about virus as a supply chain. The forum will be meeting again early in the new year in February. There are a whole host of conversations to be had around aphid monitoring and how we maintain confidence in the system. We've gone some way towards restoring that confidence after the 2019 season. There's improvements in transparency and communication across the supply chain, but those need to be maintained and go forward and taken further. A couple of the early outcomes from that forum were the production of the four-step guide for ware growers and the 6-step guide for seed growers to minimise and mitigate the impacts of virus. Again, variety comes into this. We are working with an old variety portfolio. There are opportunities to be had if we can engage the supply chain in new variety development and break down some of the barriers with import of new varieties as well. Which brings me on to seed. Seed is a unique part of the industry with its own special needs and requirements. It's a really important part of the industry. We can't function without it, and so we as GB Potatoes have recognised that, and we're very keen to develop a focused seed working group. We'll do that by working with existing seed-focused organisations, we hope under the GB Potatoes banner. We are currently talking to them, and it is early days, but we will, I'm sure, have a functioning seed group. And that's really important if we're to have that greater leverage politically and in the supply chain, because we as an industry need to speak with one voice, including seed. Oh, I thought I had another slide in there. I don't, so I will mention this one. There is 4th and 5th of September 2024, Potato Days UK will be coming to the UK. This is an event organised in conjunction with DLG, the German farming organisation, Potato Europe and Agritechnica. So this will be the first working machinery demo in Great Britain for over 2 decades. It's effectively a UK-based offshoot of Potato Europe. There'll be 15 hectares of commercial crop harvested over 2 days with indoor and outdoor exhibitions hosted by Dyson at Nocton. So that's an opportunity for all GB farmers to see practical demonstrations that we haven't had the opportunity to do for a couple of decades. Right, there's a slide here with a few of the other things. I'm sorry, I feel I'm rattling through all the things that GB Potatoes has been involved in. All of these things are there to try to turn the challenges into opportunities. There is a lot more work to do on all of them, but it's work that's better done together. I won't talk in detail through everything on that slide, except to pick up the CIPC residue monitoring group, because it's something that both Mark and Tim have alluded to already. There is a real danger that CIPC residue testing, if we don't get our act together and provide the samples that are being asked for, will effectively go down to a level of detection basis for CIPC residues. So any potato crop sold with any residue of CIPC indetectable at all will not be able to go into the food chain. Clearly, as Tim alluded to, that would be disastrous. That would rule out a lot of our older storage stock. We need to work this out. We need to find the solution for it, which does require working with HSE and providing the samples they need so we can justify the maintenance of a higher temporary MRL, which is the basis we've been operating on for the last couple of years. So that's a quick rattle through. I'm not sure I've done it justice, to be honest. There is a lot of work going on in the background, and I commend it to you and would encourage you to be involved and get involved with GB Potatoes to help it along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Slightly overrunning, aren't we?
Yeah. Sorry, we're slightly overrunning on those talks, but actually there was a lot of good stuff there, and I think it was important that each of our speakers was able to deliver. We do still have 5 minutes for questions, so Graham is at the back of the room with a microphone in his hand. Please, would someone like to raise a question? There we go.
So I think you've highlighted very well the challenges facing the industry, and they are many. And clearly you're showing fantastic leadership in that void that we find ourselves in. My question is, with all of those challenges and with yourselves being very, very busy people as well with lots of other commitments, there seems to me like there could be a manager element and a ground force element that's required to meet those challenges. And I'm interested to know what the future looks like from that aspect, because I think, you've got a hell of a challenge. And certainly when we had AHDB, it was 50, 60 people trying to cover off these issues. So that's my question.
Shall I answer that one? We are a small team. Thank you for your comments. We do feel passionately about the industry. I guess it's that catch-22, so it's we need to build enough funds to then think about the activity, then think about resource. So at the moment we are still, and we will continue to work on a lean basis. Do we want a big office with lots of people sitting in it? No, and we will not get to that place. So I think we can look to dial in resource when we need it. I think a lot of our challenges there just talk about doing things on the ground, because I think we can think about a lot of these challenges at the farm level, because that's where we'll make a lot of the change. We can only grow as fast as, I guess, we get membership and a certain amount of funding, and that's sort of self-perpetuating then at that point. Yeah.
So can I just add to that? Because I don't think we've mentioned in this seminar, although it is obviously public, we have since the 1st of October had a CEO in place in GB Potatoes, Scott Walker, former Director General of NFU Scotland, who has really hit the ground running, made an extremely good start in the role, and is going to bring a new a step up in our resource and ability to tackle some of these issues, because he has got some dedicated time to do that.
Yeah. And Graham Bannister, of many of you know. So Graham is doing a lot of work, particularly around sort of organising workshops, getting very heavily involved in the spot store type programme. But again, we are a small team. If there are offers of support, we would welcome it. So I guess it's something we can engage in together as an industry.
Thank you. Any other out there?
Andrew.
Yeah, I'll just echo what the gentleman said over there. That commend you on your foresight and the facts on the screen tell their own story. The risks of growing potatoes are certainly getting greater, and there's nothing that illustrates that more than what's happening outside right now. There's quite a lot of stuff already happening in the industry by different people doing trials. I host quite a few myself over the years. I think there's value in trying to collate some of that information, because a lot of trials I do, they get done, you find the results, and they just disappear. I don't know whether that can be administered in some form or other where we can actually extract more value from the work that's already been done, so that we avoid too much duplication and just drag a bit more value out of work that's already been done.
Shall I comment on that? So, a very good point, Andrew. Break it down to a couple of chunks. We've got all the historic, so there's a lot of work that's paid for by levy payers. So it's the legacy website, it's all that information. We are working hard now with the AHDB to understand how we can access all that, because we need to be able to use that and reference that going forward. As regards duplication, it was one of the things that we talked about very, very early in the instigation of the GB potatoes. We can't afford to be too fragmented, because duplication is a waste of resource, and that resource is fairly scarce anyway. I think we can do a coordination role, and on the back of that, I think a key thing we can do is about knowledge exchange. So it's about sharing it, getting out into the industry, best practice, and doing that. And I think that in workshops, in sort of seminar type things, is going to be a key need going forward.
Can I also say that the newsletter is quite a good way of reiterating some of that best practice, and there was a storage bulletin put out to GB Potatoes members back at the beginning of the storage season this year. I know storage season hasn't started for everyone yet, but it's little bullet points like that going out to the industry, keeping that best practice in front of growers and people further up the supply chain as well. That really is where we can deliver value, I think.
I think people are on the fence about joining. The risk to the industry of not having a body like GB Potatoes, the death by a sort of 1,000 cuts of small things. It's such a critical thing that we have a body to represent us with a single voice, to sort of put that power behind the voice to stop the industry from fragmenting, from getting another kick. So I would just urge, you and Guru, I'm on the board as well, a GB member, and it's just so important that we join and support it, because it's got to be here. I think that really everyone feels passionately it's about the amount of time and effort and volunteering that's gone into all this. The more, if anyone's on the fence, it's so important that we try and join and sign up to keep momentum going and that we have an industry so the GB potato industry can keep growing from strength to strength.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions out there? Great.
We've got, if you haven't thought of your question just now, members of the board will be in the discussion area at about 1:30. So if you'd like a more personal discussion, please come along to that.
Yeah. Okay, well, that brings us very neatly. We're a minute over time, but I think we'll live with that. Thanks everyone for coming along this afternoon to that. I hope you've found it of some use. As I said at the beginning, Graham at the back of the room has the flyer for the mailing list. If you would pick up one of those if you're not already on it and join in, then that would be very much appreciated. So thank you everyone for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.